Assistant manager Yoon Sarah had gathered all her office colleagues to make an important announcement. She informed them that she would be resigning from her position due to her upcoming marriage and expressed her gratitude, thanking everyone for everything. Her sudden declaration left the entire office in shock. Many of the colleagues voiced their dismay, telling her that they had grown so close to her over time and that it was truly unfortunate to see her go. They asked her to keep in touch after leaving. Sarah, smiling politely, wished everyone good health and began walking out of the office. Behind her, one of the male colleagues, CornhwaSama, stood frozen, wanting to say something but hesitating. A moment later, he turned back to his desk and resumed work. He started calling clients, explaining that their reservation dates were overlapping and needed adjustment. The flood of calls from the counseling department added to the chaos. Amidst this, the team leader stormed over to him, shouting furiously. She reminded him that she had clearly instructed him to keep the tabs open on the payment form and demanded to know why he couldn't get anything right. Chul thought to himself that the team leader was nothing short of a psychotic demon. This shouting, this aggressive scolding was nothing new. It was always like this, and the only reason he had managed to endure this toxic work life was because of his one-sided love for assistant manager Yoon Sarah. Now, that very woman had resigned. The team leader snapped him out of his thoughts by ordering everyone to get back to their respective places. It was time to work. But Chul stopped her and said that he had something to say. She raised an eyebrow and asked if something was wrong. Chul informed her that he, too, was planning to resign. The team leader reacted with disbelief and frustration, questioning if he was joking. She reminded him that it hadn't even been that long since assistant manager Yoon Sarah left. Standing there quietly, Chul reflected to himself that the only reason he had joined this company was to see Sarah. But even quitting wouldn't change anything now. He later returned home and sat down with a beer, muttering that the resignation only made his sadness worse. If he had known it would end this way, he thought he should have just confessed his feelings. For an entire year, he had silently watched her, his heart pounding every time he was near her. Was this really love? Surely this was one-sided love. He often questioned whether his feelings for her had ever been real. One evening, he found himself sitting at a restaurant with a friend, recounting the same story yet again. His friend, clearly tired of hearing it, asked how many times Chul was going to repeat the same tale. He pointed out bluntly that Chul had never even dated her. Chul's thoughts drifted again to a moment he had fantasized about many times. He imagined a scenario in which they were alone together, working overtime, and he would confess to her while offering her something meaningful. That fantasy sparked a memory from the past. In a flashback, Chul recalled a day at work when he had approached assistant manager Yoon Sarah with the intention of confessing. He had started by telling her that she must be exhausted from working overtime. As he offered her a drink, he said she should enjoy it while she worked. Sarah responded warmly, saying he didn't have to bring it, but she appreciated it and would enjoy it. At that moment, Chul had felt it was the perfect opportunity to confess. His heart was pounding, but just as he was about to speak, he panicked and changed the subject, blurting out that he needed to organize a list and had to leave. He turned and walked away, kicking himself internally. Back in the present, he sat in his room, still feeling weighed down by depression. Then suddenly, a message popped up on his phone. It was from Yoon Sarah, a private message completely out of the blue. He stared at the screen, surprised. She wrote that she had heard he quit the company too. She also expressed her gratitude toward him, saying that if it weren't for him, enduring her time at the company would have been incredibly difficult. She told him that, though he may not have known it, he had been like a beacon of light for her during that time. She added that, although they might not meet again, she wished him happiness. Reading those words, Chul sat in stunned silence. A beacon of light. He wondered what exactly about him made her feel that way. He couldn't recall even having a proper conversation with her. And what did she mean by, "We cannot meet anymore"? The message left him with a swirl of emotions, questions, and a bittersweet ache for a connection that might have been, but never was. Chul had gone to visit a priestess to explain everything that had been happening. But instead of giving him the clarity he was seeking, the priestess immediately began shouting at him. She scolded him loudly, asking if he had come all the way just to tell her that he had quit his job. She demanded if he even understood what he had done. Bewildered and confused, Chul could only stare at her in disbelief, wondering what exactly she was talking about. He told her that he hadn't come to report his resignation. He simply wanted to understand what Sarah meant by her message. He explained that none of it made any sense to him unless someone spelled it out. But the priestess seemed even more frustrated, exclaiming that he had no idea what was truly happening. She declared that the company he worked at was filled with a heavy cloud of energy, and that his presence there had been essential. That made no sense to Inchul. Internally, he wondered what she was going on about. Out loud, he replied with a hesitant voice, telling her she must be misunderstanding the situation. After all, he was just a travel agent. But the priestess, unbothered by his confusion, closed her eyes and began murmuring mysteriously. She claimed there was a spider present, a symbolic one. She said that his appearance at the company had been a divine blessing from the skies, and now that he had failed to act in time, there would be no way out. Her tone turned grave as she declared that one of the women would die soon. As she continued performing some kind of ritual or magic, Inchul stood in stunned silence. He nervously asked who she meant, who was going to die, but she abruptly stopped him, insisting that he keep quiet and let her finish. According to her, the gods had spoken. There was still some fortune left in Sarah's destiny from her past life. That meant there was still one more chance for him. Without warning, the priestess smacked him across the head with the hand fan she had been holding. Inchul recoiled, clutching his head, and asked why she had hit him so suddenly. She casually responded that she had given him some spiritual energy and instructed him to make the most of it this time. Later that night, Inchul returned to his house and lay in bed, unable to sleep. Although the blow to his head hadn't really hurt, the strange sensation it left behind wouldn't go away. He couldn't shake the feeling. He had gone to see the priestess because he had heard she was renowned, but all she had done was mutter bizarre things about energy clouds and spiders. What was there to figure out now, anyway? Everything was already over. Resigned to his thoughts, he closed his eyes and decided to try sleeping. But just as he was drifting off, something strange happened. A flicker of odd lighting, or was it energy, seemed to come from the ceiling above him. He opened his eyes, puzzled. Something didn't seem right. He looked around the room and realized that it wasn't quite the room he had fallen asleep in. Somehow, the coffee pot he had thrown away years ago was back in its usual spot. The old wardrobe, which he had clearly gotten rid of, was standing right there. Everything looked exactly like his room from 3 years ago. His confusion deepened when he checked his phone. It wasn't his current phone. It was the old one he had used 3 years ago. More shockingly, the date on the screen matched his very first day at the company. He shut his eyes again, trying to make sense of it all, muttering that this had to be some kind of dream. But when he opened them again and saw the unchanged surroundings, something in him shifted. He sat up straight and murmured to himself, realizing that even if it was a dream, this was his chance. If it truly was the day he had joined the company, then it was also the day he would see Sarah again. With that thought burning in his chest, he sprang into action. He got ready as quickly as he could and rushed out toward the office, heart pounding with anticipation. He kept repeating to himself that if this really was his first day again, if time had truly turned back, then this was his opportunity to see her once more. And when he finally arrived at the office, there she was, Sarah, just like before. He stood before her, barely able to contain his excitement, overwhelmed by the surreal moment of being able to meet her all over again. Inchul greeted her with a polite smile, saying, "Good morning, Sarah Sasai." But Sarah looked at him strangely, her expression cautious and puzzled, as she asked whether she knew him or if he was mistaking her for someone else. It was at that moment Inchul realized that, of course, she didn't recognize him yet. To her, he was a stranger because from her perspective they were meeting for the first time. Trying to recover quickly, Inchul began to explain himself. He told her that before joining the company, he had taken time to memorize the names of all the employees in Team 1. He introduced himself as Bang Inchul, the new hire who would be starting work that day. Sarah responded with a neutral tone, acknowledging that he must be the new employee they were expecting. Just then, another woman approached them. Her name was Huang Sui. She walked up to Sarah and asked whether she had arrived, then curiously inquired who the person standing next to her was. Sarah replied that the man beside her was a new hire on their team and encouraged Sui to support him well. Sui replied obediently, addressing Sarah as Chief, and then turned her attention to Inchul. Sui tilted her head slightly and noted that it was a bit odd. Usually, new hires were introduced by the manager. Inchul felt embarrassed, realizing that he might have overstepped. He thought to himself that of course Sarah would be weirded out if someone she didn't know acted overly familiar. He may have misjudged how to approach her in this altered timeline. Nonetheless, Sui offered to introduce herself before anyone else. She told him that her name was Huang Sui, and that she had joined the company about 6 months ago. She added that she would soon be promoted to the position of advisor. As she led him inside the office, she explained that although people often thought a travel agency would be laid back and carefree, she took the relationship between supervisors and subordinates very seriously, and she expected the same from him. She confirmed his name again, and then said she would begin introducing him to the rest of the office. Sui gave him a heads up, warning that the company had a large number of female employees, and it would be risky for him if he approached any of them with questionable intentions. Inchul nodded in agreement, though internally, he was surprised by how assertive Sui was acting toward him on his very first day, especially since, in the timeline he remembered, she had only been working there for 6 months. She began the introductions by pointing to a woman and saying that this was assistant manager Su Yeju, the person in charge of planning all the company trips. Yeju gave him a quick, dry glance and commented that he must be the new hire. Without waiting for a response, she added that she was a bit busy and then walked away. Inchul noted to himself that Yeju hadn't changed at all. Still blunt and unbothered, just as he remembered. Sui also remarked that assistant manager Su was always busy. As Inchul continued scanning the office, he found himself thinking that this truly was the same team one he had worked with for 3 years. The familiarity was uncanny. Then, Yoon Sarah formally introduced herself. She told him that she was the head of marketing and that her name was Chief Yoon Sarah. She greeted him briefly while still working on her computer, her eyes barely leaving the screen. Sui turned to her and remarked that she seemed especially busy that day. Inchul, however, noticed something that troubled him. Sarah had greeted him without even making eye contact. That wasn't like her. Even in a dream, it felt off. But then he remembered what the priestess had told him. The gods had said there was still some good fortune from her previous life, and that he had been given another chance. He wondered if this was it. Was this the second chance the priestess had mentioned? If so, he resolved to do his best. He nodded slightly to himself, muttering that it was time to try again, and this time he'd do better. Later, during lunch, he went to Sarah's office carrying a drink. She looked exhausted and asked him what it was. He replied that it was a vanilla latte, her favorite. He remembered clearly that she used to enjoy drinking them. He gently encouraged her to drink it, saying it might help ease her fatigue. Internally, he hoped this small gesture would leave a positive impression on her, but her response wasn't what he expected. She stared at the cup and told him to take it back. Startled, he asked her what she meant. Her voice rose as she firmly repeated her words, demanding that he take the drink back immediately. Embarrassed and confused, he grabbed the mug again and apologized, his mind spinning. That was not the reaction he had anticipated. Unbeknownst to him, Sarah stood there processing the moment. A question stirred in her mind. How had he known she liked vanilla lattes? Meanwhile, Sui had been watching the entire interaction from a distance. Irritated, she thought to herself how unfair it seemed. She was the one who had been teaching him how to work all day, yet he brought coffee to the chief instead. Walking up to him, Sui instructed Inchul to open Excel. He looked at her blankly and asked what she meant. She repeated herself more firmly this time, telling him to open Excel. There were long lists to manage and plenty of work that required using the software. She added that the new price tables for the vacation packages had just arrived, and it was time to organize them. Inchul got to work immediately, collecting the data and editing the charts. After a while, he asked if there was anything else he needed to do. Watching him work, Sui grew visibly confused. She hadn't expected him to be this skilled. In fact, she found herself wondering how he was even better than her. Sui told Inchul that he didn't need to do anything else for the time being. It seemed like he was quite good at his work. Hearing that, Inchul thought to himself with a slight smirk that of course he was good at it. She had nagged him about Excel for 3 whole years in the past, so it was only natural that he had mastered it by now. Still, Sui wasn't entirely ready to shower him with praise. She warned him not to get too satisfied just because he had handled one task well. He responded respectfully with a yes, Sunbae. She then reminded him that there would be a company dinner that night, a welcome party for the new hires, and he had to attend and join the rest of the team. He nodded enthusiastically, visibly excited. Later that night, the entire office team was gathered around a long dinner table, plates of food and bottles of soju spread out across it. Everyone was enjoying themselves. Inchul, ever mindful, offered pork cheek to the department head and told him it was something he liked. The department head chuckled in surprise, asking how the new hire knew his preference. Inchul responded smoothly, saying that pork cheek was a signature food of the area, and a man like the department head would naturally be familiar with the local delicacies. The older man laughed, clearly impressed with Inchol's attentiveness. Watching the exchange, Sui thought to herself that she really liked this guy. She hoped Inchol would stay with the company for a long time. In her mind, he wasn't just a diligent worker. He also had a way of reading the room, setting the mood, and making everyone feel comfortable. At one point during the dinner, Inchol offered a glass of soju to Sui, encouraging her to have a drink. He mentioned that she preferred soju over beer. She looked at him in confusion, asking how he knew that, especially when it was their first day meeting each other. It didn't make sense to her. Internally, Inchol panicked a little, realizing he had slipped. He thought she was close to figuring out something was off. But outwardly, he kept his composure and told her that he'd simply noticed she hadn't touched the beer all night. So he made a guess. Then he quickly shifted the topic, saying that it wasn't important at the moment. They should just enjoy a drink as co-workers. The table erupted into cheerful chatter as they clinked glasses and continued drinking. Sui kept glancing at Inchol, her curiosity deepening. To her, he was an intriguing person. Someone who seemed clumsy at first glance, the type who might take a while to adjust. But he turned out to be a highly diligent worker who handled everything effortlessly. In fact, around people, he became a completely different person. She couldn't help but feel a growing interest in him. Meanwhile, Inchol felt a quiet satisfaction as he observed the warm and lively atmosphere around the table. Those 3 years he had previously spent in the company weren't wasted after all. Creating this kind of mood now came naturally to him. Encouraged by his success so far, he thought that he would now smoothly make his way over to sit beside Sarah and speak with her. But before he could, Sarah stood up from her seat and addressed the department head, informing him that she would be leaving first. Inchol's heart sank in a wave of panic. This wasn't what he had expected. He silently thought to himself that she couldn't just leave like that. The department head checked his watch, agreed that it was getting late, and told Chief Yoon to get back home safely. He thanked her for the enjoyable meal they had shared. Sarah smiled and said goodbye to everyone, promising to see them the next day. With that, she left. Inchol remained seated, stunned and a bit disappointed that Sarah had left so early. He thought to himself that he hadn't even gotten the chance to say a single word to her. Everything he prepared and hoped for seemed to fall flat in that moment. He continued engaging with the team, offering drinks and trying to keep up the cheerful mood. He presented another glass to the department head, but he couldn't help but think to himself that the department head's favorite wasn't Sui. It was clearly Sarah. His mind wandered again, filled with frustration. One of the co-workers turned to Inchol and asked if he was any good at singing. The question embarrassed him, catching him off guard. He gave a nervous smile, unsure how to respond. 3 hours later, the dinner was wrapping up. Inchol stood up and began saying his goodbyes to everyone. He made sure to respectfully address the department head, wishing him a safe journey home, and told everyone he'd see them again tomorrow. After his polite farewells, he found himself walking alone. Everyone else had either left or was gathering their things. Only Sui remained behind with him. He turned to her and said softly, "Sunbae, I'll be heading out now." He began walking away, feeling a weight of disappointment in his chest. After everything he'd done that evening, he hadn't managed to exchange even a single meaningful word with Sarah. All that effort, and it still felt like nothing had changed. But then, just as he was about to leave, Sui called out to him. She told him that they hadn't had a proper chance to talk yet. She suggested that the two of them go for another round of drinks together. Hearing that, Inchol stopped in his tracks, startled. Her words caught him completely off guard. He stood there, surprised, trying to make sense of what she really meant by that. Inchol agreed to the invitation, and the two of them headed to a quiet bar nearby for another round of drinks. As they settled into their seats, Sui raised her glass with a relaxed smile, remarking that drinks like "Yes, like a cloud" were always the best. Inchol, sitting across from her, watched her with quiet curiosity. He analyzed the moment in disbelief. Was this really Hwang Sui being so easygoing and open? It felt strangely different from the person he had known for years. After they clinked glasses, she picked up the bottle again and offered to pour the next round, saying it was her turn now. He blinked, still surprised by how casual everything felt. But before he could say anything, she told him to stop. He immediately asked what she meant, apologizing without understanding what had gone wrong. Sui let out a soft sigh and told him that since they were the same age, he didn't need to speak to her so formally or distant. She encouraged him to speak comfortably with her and not act so cold. Inchul thought to himself that this side of her so open and approachable was something he never would have imagined. She continued, telling him that if he was going to be part of the company, he should start behaving like a real team member. She reminded him again to stop speaking so stiffly. He nodded quickly, correcting himself mid-sentence from, "Yes, Sunbae," to a more casual, "All right." Sui poured him another drink and added, with a tinge of emotion, that if he was going to join the team, he should have come earlier. Her voice softened as she shared a bit of her own experience, how hard it had been for her when she first started. She admitted that it had been lonely, especially since there was no one around her age to talk to freely. Listening to her speak so honestly made Inchul view her in a different light. For the first time, he wondered whether, if he had made an effort to approach her more actively in the past, they might have gotten along better. The thought lingered with him as he looked at her across the table. Still, he smiled and raised his glass again, saying that what mattered now was the present. They were there together, so they should enjoy the drink. They both cheered and clinked their glasses, sharing a quiet moment of warmth in the noisy bar. After several drinks, the two of them stepped out into the cold night air. Inchul wrapped his coat tighter and commented on how chilly it had gotten. Then he asked about the bill, wondering how much it had come to. Sui brushed it off with a smile, telling him it was around $50, but she had already paid. Since she was his Sunbae, it was only natural for her to take care of it, at least this much. Rather than heading home right away, she suggested they take a short walk to sober up a little before parting ways. He agreed, and the two of them wandered quietly together under the streetlights. At first, Inchul believed they were simply taking a stroll around the neighborhood or through a nearby park. But as time passed, he found himself blinking in disbelief. Somehow, their walk had ended with both of them standing in front of a motel. The situation had unfolded so unexpectedly, it barely felt real. Even once they were inside, he couldn't quite process what was happening. His thoughts raced. He never imagined this would be possible. He was now alone with Hwang Sui, in a setting that felt almost surreal. Sui, slightly tipsy and speaking freely, started teasing him gently. She complained that he was the one who had made her start thinking about the yoga sessions. Her words were disjointed and playful, but carried an unmistakable tension. She muttered that she didn't understand why she was acting like this earlier in the evening. She had been composed, but now it felt different. Inchul sat beside her, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of the moment. He kept thinking to himself that this couldn't be real. Despite his lack of experience, he was now in this unexpected situation, and with none other than Sui. She mentioned that it would be embarrassing if she was the only one trying to lead the yoga session, nudging him to join her too. Inchul looked flustered, admitting quietly that it was actually his first time doing yoga. That surprised her. She turned to him with wide eyes and asked if he was serious. She had assumed, based on the way he carried himself earlier, that he was familiar with it, maybe even experienced. She confessed that she had been genuinely impressed and had thought he dated a number of women before. Laughing at her own misunderstanding, she muttered that this was insane. What was she doing here with someone so innocent? But after a pause, she added that since things had already gone this far, she couldn't let it end awkwardly. Inchul smiled faintly and said that he was happy to be joining her for the session. Despite the bizarre circumstances, both of them seemed to find comfort in each other's company. Their connection felt genuine, and for a fleeting moment, they let themselves enjoy the unexpected bond that had formed between them. During the game, Inchul turned to her and asked softly if he had done something wrong. Sui responded with a teasing tone, telling him that yes, he had done something very wrong. But since she was enjoying playing the game with him, she would let it slide and forgive him. After the game ended, the two of them began drinking together. Inchul remarked that the drinks at the motel were surprisingly good. As she watched him sipping her favorite drink, she couldn't help but protest. She told him to stop drinking it, saying that she had wanted to drink that one herself. Half joking and half exhausted, she told him to come lie down and hand the drink over, adding that she didn't have any more strength left in her body. Inchul glanced at her, uncertain. He wasn't sure if, at that moment, he was supposed to hold her or simply stay where he was. She appeared to want more comfort, more ease, as if she were slowly letting her guard down. Curious, she shifted the conversation and asked him something that had been on her mind. More importantly, how had he started working at their company? He replied casually, confirming that it was indeed Zoe Travel Agency. He explained that he wasn't entirely sure how it happened, He had simply submitted his resume and been accepted almost immediately. He admitted that he found it rather strange himself, since his qualifications weren't particularly impressive. Puzzled him. As he thought about it more, Inchul realized something. This was the first time he had ever shared such a personal conversation with Sui, despite having known her for nearly 3 years. That thought lingered in his mind as he turned the question back to her, asking how she had ended up at the same company. She answered lightly, saying it was nothing special, just something along the lines of a special employment route. That response surprised him. He looked at her and asked with disbelief if she had been scouted. That, to him, sounded incredible. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing and that things had simply turned out that way. He then commented that if he thought about it, there were a lot of strange things about their company. There weren't many employees, yet they operated out of a huge building, and the internet connection there was exceptionally good. Sui seemed caught off guard by that observation and looked at him curiously. She asked how he could know all that on his first day at work. He immediately grew flustered and tried to explain himself, insisting that it wasn't what it sounded like. He clarified that he was merely saying the company seemed nice. He didn't actually know anything for sure. Laughing awkwardly, he tried to ease the tension. Inchul smiled and suggested they play another round of the game. Sui blinked and asked if she wasn't already tired after just finishing a session. But she seemed excited, and with a grin, he admitted that he wanted to try playing more too. Sui could hardly believe what she had just heard. He genuinely wanted to play more games, despite the fact that they had already played quite a lot. She reminded herself that it was still only the first day since they had met under these circumstances. Her thoughts began to drift, tangled with confusion and curiosity, when Inchul suddenly said, almost as if reading her mind, that he knew it was impossible, right? She hesitated before responding, asking him to wait a moment and let her think. But in the pause that followed, her mind wandered again. After all, wasn't she the one who had been the most eager to try out all the games earlier? Her own excitement had started everything. Inchul, puzzled by her reaction, asked what she was even trying to say. Meanwhile, he found himself overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. He thought to himself that this couldn't be real. It felt too dreamlike. There was no way something like this could happen again. A quiet conviction crept into his thoughts. Everything would return to normal once he woke up. It would be his familiar room again, just as always. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep, convinced it was all just a strange dream. But when morning came and he opened his eyes, he was stunned to find that he was still in the motel room, not at home. Panic slowly set in. His mind raced with confusion. Was he seriously still in the same motel from the day before? Nothing made sense. He wondered aloud what had happened and whether this wasn't all supposed to be a dream. But if it wasn't a dream, then what was it? He began searching the area frantically, looking around for Sui. Her absence puzzled him even more. Where had she gone? Picking up his phone, he considered the possibility that this might truly be his reality now. And if that were the case, he figured he'd better get going, to work. Determined to make sense of it all, he quickly got ready and headed to the company. Upon arriving, he saw Sui there, and her outfit was exactly the same as it had been the previous day. That single detail hit him hard. It confirmed everything. They had actually done a yoga session together. It wasn't a hallucination. Approaching her with hesitation, he asked if she had left first the night before. Sui, keeping her professional demeanor, reminded him that they were at work now and that he should speak more respectfully. Without giving him a chance to respond, she turned and walked away. Inchul stood frozen for a moment, bewildered. What had just happened? Had he said something wrong? Or was it just because they were in the office now where things had to be more formal? Still trying to wrap his head around the strangeness of it all, he muttered to himself that this definitely wasn't a dream. Nothing made sense, and the only conclusion he could draw was that he had somehow traveled 3 years back in time. Then, like a sudden jolt, another realization struck him. If this truly was his new reality, then did that mean he had a chance to get closer to Sarah? With that thought, he turned and began walking toward her. Sarah was sitting calmly at her desk, focused on her work. Inchul found himself struggling with yet another dilemma. This time, it involved Hwang Sui. He kept thinking about how he had gotten involved with her, how they had done yoga together just the day before. It had been his first experience doing something like that, and while it had left an impression on him, his heart still firmly belonged to Sarah, the woman he had always loved. Torn between the two, he asked himself what he was supposed to do now. Could he really just go out with Sui? but ignoring her entirely didn't feel right either. Still, if he pursued anything with Sui, he feared it might be over with Sarah. The situation was far more difficult than he could manage, and he continued thinking helplessly, trying to figure out what path to take. While he was lost in thought, Sarah approached and tried to get his attention. However, he didn't respond, too absorbed in his inner conflict to notice her presence. Observing him quietly, Sarah noticed the tension written all over his face. She wondered if it was because of her. Was it because she had been cold toward him the previous day? The way she had acted had been out of shock, but now she regretted it. Feeling guilty, she decided to take care of her assigned payments first and left without saying anything. As she walked away, the documents and files she was carrying suddenly slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. Inchul immediately stepped in to help her, apologizing and blaming his clumsiness for not reacting sooner. As they picked up the papers together, Sarah mentioned that she thought some of the data might be missing. Inchul sifted through the files and pointed out that she needed to attach the statistics from the previous year so that they could be properly compared with the current figures. Sarah listened to his words in stunned silence, taken aback by the clarity of his suggestion. She asked him what he meant, still in disbelief. Inchul, realizing what he had just done, panicked. He hadn't intended to step out of line or speak as if he held more authority. He had spoken without even realizing it, and now it might have seemed inappropriate. Trying to recover from his slip-up, he responded awkwardly that it was nothing, telling her not to worry about it. But Sarah looked at him directly and said his name Inchul. He replied hesitantly, "Yes." To his surprise, she thanked him sincerely for pointing it out. Meanwhile, team leader and Hiren from personnel and management had been reviewing all the files and data. She commended Sarah, saying that the information was organized well and easy to understand, with no issues to be found. She praised her work, stating clearly that she had done an excellent job. Sarah thanked the team leader respectfully and, with a sense of relief, thought to herself how fortunate she was. Team leader Hiren was known for her meticulous standards and rarely handed out compliments so freely. It was reassuring to have received one. Later, Sarah bought a drink from the cafe and placed it gently on Inchul's desk. He was deeply focused on his work at the time, and the gesture caught him completely by surprise. Startled, he looked up and asked what it was. Sarah replied calmly, saying it wasn't anything big, just a coffee from the first floor. She added that things had gone smoothly earlier thanks to his help. Because the weather was so warm, she had ordered it iced and asked if that was okay with him. He thanked her earnestly, saying he would truly savor it. She also took the opportunity to apologize for how she had behaved the previous day. Curious, he asked why she felt the need to say sorry. Sarah explained that he had been nothing but kind and had genuinely tried to connect with her, but she had misunderstood everything and had reacted too sensitively. She admitted that she had judged him too quickly and suggested that from now on, they try to get along. Inchul's face lit up with excitement, and he agreed happily. As he took a sip of the coffee, he noted with delight that it was the vanilla latte Sarah liked so much. Somehow, that small detail made it feel even more meaningful to him. He couldn't explain why, but the gesture made him incredibly happy. From a distance, Sui was watching the entire exchange. Her expression darkened, and her eyes filled with quiet anger. She quickly walked to the restroom, her thoughts churning with frustration. Seeing Inchul smiling so brightly with the chief made her wonder if, to him, she had just been a temporary distraction, a way to pass time. Back at the office, Inchul continued to focus on his work and performed impressively. As the workday came to a close, the department head announced that he would be leaving first. Before leaving, he told Inchul to wrap things up and head home soon as well. Inchul nodded and replied with a respectful, "Okay, sir," and the department head turned back to the office, wishing everyone a safe return home before departing. Once he had finished all his work, Inchul looked around the office, thinking that he should at least say goodbye to Sarah before he left. As he scanned the room, he wondered where she had gone. Just then, Sui appeared and confronted him, asking if he was already planning to go home. She pointed out that, as his superior, she still had work to do and reminded him there were many tasks left to complete. Without waiting for his response, she instructed him to follow her. They both walked into the storage room together. Not far away, Sarah noticed the two of them entering and paused. She found herself confused. It was already time to leave. Why had Inchul gone into the storage room with Sui? Inside, Sui pointed at the disorganized stacks of books and papers. She explained that these were pamphlets from the last event and that the place had become a complete mess. Inchul asked what they should do about it, and she simply told him to clean it up. She advised him to bring everything out of the storage room and to make sure he did a thorough job. After finishing her work, Sui stepped out of the storage room and ran into Sarah, who was just standing nearby. She addressed her calmly, saying, "Chief, you haven't left yet?" Sarah responded that she was about to leave and told Sui she had done well today. Sui returned to her desk, resumed her office tasks, and glanced at the clock. It was already quite late. She wondered if Inchul had managed to finish yet. Curiosity got the better of her, and she walked back toward the storage room to check. Upon entering, she was utterly shocked to find that Inchul had completed all the cleanup work perfectly. She stood there, surprised and speechless. Inchul looked visibly proud of the work he had completed. Standing amid the now tidy space, he remarked that he had finished cleaning everything up and had even gone the extra mile to sort the materials. However, his confidence was short-lived. Suze stood nearby, shocked by what she saw. She couldn't believe that a new hire like him had managed to do all of it so quickly, and properly at that. Her initial surprise quickly gave way to rising irritation. The more she looked, the more her frustration bubbled to the surface. He noticed the sudden shift in her expression and asked cautiously if something was wrong. In a sharp tone, she asked him whether he had organized the materials according to location. Before he could respond properly, she struck him across the arm, not harshly but firmly, and scolded him for lacking common sense. She reminded him that the materials had to be sorted by location, not by any arbitrary method. Caught off guard, Inchul stumbled over his words, apologizing and trying to explain. He mentioned that Sunbae had once done it a certain way, and added that Chief Sarah had already left the office. He hadn't seen her anywhere and assumed she was gone. Sui immediately questioned why he was asking about Sarah. He replied calmly that he had simply wanted to greet her before leaving. Since he hadn't seen her around, he thought she must have gone home already. Sui brushed off his explanation and pointed out that it was quite late. Without warning, she grabbed him by the collar. Inchul froze, stunned by her sudden and aggressive behavior. Internally, she was seething. The way he so casually mentioned Sarah had set her off. Her thoughts churned bitterly. "This is making me furious. What does he even think of me?" In a voice laced with emotion, Sui asked him directly how he could still be thinking about the chief, even in this situation. Didn't anything that had happened between them yesterday matter to him at all? Inchul stared at her, caught completely off guard. His mind raced. What is she talking about? No, it's not like that. So then a strange thought crept in. Could she be jealous of Sarah right now? Is that what this is? Felt surreal. A woman as beautiful as Sui, acting jealous because of someone like him? He quickly shook his head, trying to shrug off the thought. What was he even thinking? Meanwhile, Department Head Sue, who was on his way home, suddenly remembered that he had left behind some important materials he had planned to review that evening. Realizing the urgency, he turned his car around and headed back toward the company, muttering to himself that he had no choice but to return to the office. Back inside the building, things had taken a strange turn. Despite the workplace setting, Sui had dragged Inchul into doing a yoga session with her again. He was nervous, glancing around anxiously and whispering that it wasn't appropriate. They were at work, after all. What if someone saw them? Sui dismissed his concerns with a relaxed tone, assuring him that everyone had already left and there was no need to worry. Besides, she added with a smirk, it wasn't as if he disliked doing yoga with her. Reluctantly, Inchul followed along, the two of them continuing with their stretches in the quiet storage room. But suddenly he stopped mid-pose and looked around, clearly startled. He insisted that he had heard something, that someone was in the office. Sui didn't take him seriously at first. She waved him off and accused him of making excuses just to avoid the session. But Inchul stood firm. His tone was serious now, and he said it wasn't an excuse. He was certain someone was really there. Just moments later, Sarah entered the storage room, her voice calm but pointed as she addressed them both. She told them that it was getting very late and that they should head home now. Inchul froze. Panic surged through him the moment he saw her standing there. The department head had been on his way home when he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten the flash drive containing the materials he was supposed to review. A wave of frustration swept over him as he realized that his trip had been a complete waste of time. With no choice but to retrieve the files, he turned his car around and headed back toward the company. quietly remarking to himself that it was urgent and unavoidable. Before their conversation could go any further, Sarah had suddenly collapsed without warning, losing consciousness. Inchul, who had been sitting nervously inside the storage room, had grown increasingly anxious. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to figure out what to do next. The fact that Sarah had seen them weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both in serious trouble. Once Sarah had regained her senses, her shock had quickly transformed into fury. She had begun scolding them, clearly appalled by what she had witnessed. Her voice, raised and trembling with disbelief, had carried a warning. What she had seen wouldn't be ignored, and both of them should prepare themselves for whatever consequences would follow. Inchul had never seen her so visibly angry. Later that evening, he returned to his home, gripped by panic and uncertainty. His mind couldn't stop replaying what had happened. He questioned what was to become of him now. The idea of punishment, discipline, or even dismissal crossed his mind, and it felt unbearable. What unsettled him most was the look Sarah had given him. A glare filled not just with disappointment, but with disgust. He couldn't recall ever seeing that expression from her before. To him, it felt like everything was already over. Whatever second chance he'd been granted had now completely slipped away. Lying on his bed in a haze of despair, he felt lost. His thoughts churned restlessly. He didn't know what to do or where to go from here. Morning eventually arrived, but it brought no relief. He lay still, dreading the idea of returning to work. He muttered to himself, questioning if he really had to go back, especially when being fired now felt inevitable. And yet, part of him figured that if termination was coming, he might as well face it head-on. As he reached for his phone to check the time, his eyes locked onto the date displayed on the screen. A rush of confusion and fear overwhelmed him as he stared in disbelief. The date hadn't changed. It was the same as his first day at the company. Panic set in as he questioned whether he was hallucinating. He began shouting in a mix of shock and frustration, loud enough that his neighbor banged on the wall, asking him to keep it down. He apologized quickly and tried to steady himself, but his thoughts were racing. If this was truly his first day again, had time reversed itself? Was it because of what had happened yesterday? None of it made sense, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to get back to the company immediately. Upon arriving, he was met by team leader and Hiren, who didn't bother hiding her disappointment. She remarked curtly that being late on his very first day wasn't a great look, and though it was impressive in its own way, it certainly wasn't something to be proud of. Inchul bowed his head and apologized sincerely, promising that it wouldn't happen again. He reminded himself that he had already been through this scenario once. With this second chance, he intended to avoid repeating his earlier mistakes. The team leader sighed, saying that under ordinary circumstances, she would have sent him home then and there. But since it was technically his first day again, she decided to overlook it. She then summoned Sarah and asked her to introduce Inchul to the rest of the staff and take responsibility for his onboarding. Sarah agreed calmly, showing no sign of remembering anything that had occurred the previous day. Inchul followed her through the office, feeling a wave of relief. It seemed that somehow the events of the day before had been erased. The weight he'd carried just hours earlier began to lift. Sarah had explained that the team leader had no patience for people who made excuses, and quietly remarked that he had handled the situation well. She then formally introduced herself as Yoon Sarah. The name echoed in his mind. It felt familiar, and yet distant, like he was being given a fresh start. It dawned on him that this really was a reset. She had no memory of their prior interaction. She introduced him next to assistant manager Soo Yeju, who welcomed him with polite professionalism. Inchul responded accordingly, and mentally noted how the setting, while familiar, carried subtle differences this time around. It was strange but also reassuring. Then he met Hwang Sui again. She introduced herself with composure, and Inchul responded with respectful formality. He realized then that whatever bond or tension had existed between them previously had been wiped clean. This too had been reset. Following that, Sarah brought him over to manager Yang Minu, who greeted him casually. Finally, she introduced him to department head Guak Sangdo, who acknowledged him briefly. After the round of introductions, Sarah remarked that the process was now complete. Returning to the main office space, both of them took their seats at their assigned desks. Sarah handed him a manual, instructing him to read it thoroughly and familiarize himself with the company's systems and policies. Inchul quietly nodded, beginning to understand just how profound this second chance really was. After receiving the manual, Inchul had turned to Sarah and expressed his gratitude, thanking her sincerely. He then shifted his focus to the computer and began working, but his mind quickly drifted elsewhere. The strangeness of his situation lingered heavily in his thoughts. The memory of the gaming session he had shared with Sui the day before resurfaced, and he began questioning whether that too had been erased in the reset. Had it really happened, or had it been undone along with everything else? He couldn't be sure, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. It seemed unlikely that a moment like that would present itself again. Yet, amid the confusion, another realization emerged. Sarah was no longer avoiding him. Her demeanor toward him had softened, and she was interacting with him naturally. That change brought a sense of relief, but at the same time, a flicker of regret surfaced in his mind when he thought about his relationship with Sui. As he tried to focus on his work, conflicting thoughts continued to swirl inside him. He wondered what might happen if, by chance, he and Sui were the last two remaining at the welcome party that night. Could something similar occur again? The mere possibility overwhelmed him. Guilt crept in as he chastised himself for even entertaining such thoughts. He muttered inwardly that he was trash. What was he thinking when Sarah was right there in front of him? Just then, Sui approached his desk, catching him completely off guard. She asked if he was struggling with anything, her voice cool but professional. The question jolted him back to reality. She reminded him that the manual had been uploaded in the shared files and instructed him to read through it thoroughly. If he truly wanted to make up for being late on his first day, then he needed to get serious and put in the effort. Her tone was firm, leaving no room for excuses. That night, the company held a welcome party to celebrate the new hire. The entire team had gathered, and the mood was light with casual conversations and drinks flowing freely. During the dinner, Inchul found himself presenting a dish pork cheek to the department head, noting that it was his favorite. The department head looked at him in surprise, clearly caught off guard. He questioned how a new employee could possibly know such a specific detail. Inchul replied smoothly, explaining that pork cheek was one of the signature dishes in the region. Internally, he was thinking that if he simply repeated the same steps as last time, perhaps he could recreate the moment he had shared with Sui. The possibility of getting another chance at that game tempted him, even as he tried to stay grounded. During the welcome party, Inchul had carefully approached Sui with a bottle of soju in hand. With a respectful yet casual gesture, he poured a glass for her, recalling that she preferred soju over beer. His expression was composed, but internally he was carefully mirroring each step from the previous timeline. He believed that if he followed the same path, the outcome might unfold in the same way again. Despite the quiet thrill building in his chest, he reminded himself that the one he truly had feelings for was Sarah. For hours later, the party had long since wound down. Inchul and Sui were now standing outside the beer station, the air slightly cooler and quieter under the dim streetlights. Sui, speaking with a light tone, mentioned that they hadn't really had a chance to talk properly during the party. She wondered aloud if they should go for another round of drinks, just the two of them. He nodded without hesitation, agreeing, and the two of them headed into a nearby bar. As they walked in, Inchul couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Everything was falling into place just as it had before. He felt confident now that the same chain of events would play out once again. If everything continued as it had, the night would end with them at the motel, playing games together. That idea alone sent a strange mix of pride and anticipation coursing through him. Eventually, they sat down and began playing a game together, just as they had previously. Inchul watched the scene unfold with an odd sense of déjà vu. Every detail, the lighting, her posture, even her hesitant laughter, matched the past so perfectly that it felt like he had stepped directly back into that moment. He found himself grinning subtly, almost amused by how precisely things were repeating. The fact that Sui was sitting across from him, showing the same bashful reactions as before, filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He likened the situation to using a cheat code. He already knew the outcome, and the sense of control was both surreal and thrilling. On the other side, Sui was watching him with a puzzled expression. Something about his playing style felt oddly familiar. It was as if he already knew her weak points in the game, where she would slip, how she would react. She began to question it in her mind, wondering if it was just coincidence or something more intentional. Inchul, watching her closely, found her confusion amusing. The next morning at the company, Inchul ran into Sui as soon as he arrived. He greeted her, slightly sternly reminding her that they were at work and she should speak respectfully. Internally, he reflected on his previous mistakes, realizing that last time he had been careless and not cautious enough in his behavior. Determined to do better this time, he resolved to be more careful. Despite his polite greeting, Sui ignored him and walked away without responding. Inchul thought to himself that if he focused properly today, perhaps he could finally improve his relationship with Sarah. Sitting down at his computer, he prepared himself to work diligently. He expected the day's routine to unfold similarly to before. He imagined Sarah would prepare the report again, but suspected it might be flawed, leading to a repeat of previous problems. Indeed, his prediction was accurate. Sarah soon pointed out that some essential data was missing. Inchul calmly suggested that she include statistics from the previous year to provide context and strengthen the report's quality. Sarah was impressed by his insight, and this encouraged Inchul to maintain a professional attitude throughout the day. He modestly told her it was just a thought he wanted to share in case it would help. She thanked him sincerely and went off to submit the report to the team leader. Inchul felt a quiet sense of pride, imagining that, just like last time, he might be rewarded with a vanilla latte. Everything seemed to be unfolding according to his hopes. But then, he noticed Sui watching both of them from a distance. A pang of concern hit him and he sighed inwardly, thinking, "Not again." Sui announced she was leaving and walked away. Inchul worried that if Sui became jealous again, as she had during the previous tense incident in the storage room, it could cause trouble. He promised himself he would do whatever it took to prevent that from happening again. Later, as the department head prepared to leave for the day, he wished everyone a safe journey home and said he would see them tomorrow. Inchul was filled with excitement and pride, believing he had finally shown Sarah his best side, and hoped he could leave without any awkwardness. But just then, Sui approached him unexpectedly and asked if he could help her with some urgent tasks. Despite feeling reluctant and questioning why she was involving him again, Inchul agreed. She led him toward the storage room and asked him to finish all the work there. Inchul hesitated and asked if it really had to be done immediately. Sui teased him playfully, accusing him of trying to avoid work like a typical new hire. He quickly denied the accusation but couldn't stop worrying. He feared that if things continued this way, the awkward incident they had shared before might repeat itself. Inchul firmly insisted there was no need to relive that situation again today. Sui smiled and said it would be better if they spent some quality time together. Just the two of them. Inchul was taken aback by her unexpected words and felt a rush of embarrassment, unsure how to respond. As they worked side by side in the storage room, Inchul found himself more aware of Sui's presence than usual. He noticed the way she glanced at him from time to time, her expression softer than before. The silence between them was charged with unspoken feelings and tension. Inchul's thoughts raced. He questioned whether Sui's behavior was jealousy, a desire for closeness, or something else entirely. His heart beat faster, and he struggled to focus on the tasks at hand. Sui broke the silence, laughing lightly at his awkwardness, telling him not to take things too seriously. Inchul smiled nervously, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't expected. The mundane work suddenly felt less tedious with her nearby. Inchul began to wonder if this was the start of a different kind of relationship, one where work, friendship, and something more personal could blend. He thought back to the gaming sessions, the subtle changes in how she addressed him, and her compliments. Inchul realized these moments weren't just casual or superficial. They hinted at a growing connection between them. He hoped that by being more attentive and careful, he could nurture this bond without causing misunderstandings or conflicts. As the evening wore on, the tasks in the storage room slowly neared completion. Inchul felt a sense of accomplishment but also a mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a deep desire to understand what Sui truly felt. He resolved to be patient and attentive, knowing that building trust and friendship would take time. When they finally finished, Sui thanked him again, this time with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Inchul felt his heart swell with hope. As they parted ways that evening, he promised himself he would do his best to keep this fragile connection alive and growing. Inchul teased Sui, telling her that if she wanted him to do the extra work in the storage room, then he expected her to make him some ramen in return. He joked that since she had left early the previous day, she probably hadn't managed to fully cure her hangover. Inchul suggested that the task could wait until tomorrow, trying to lighten the mood and ease the tension between them. Embarrassed, he wondered aloud if he had overdone it during their gaming session the night before. Sui admitted she wasn't sure but agreed that there was no need to rush and it didn't have to be done right then. Unexpectedly, she invited him over to her place. Inchul was taken aback. He hadn't meant his words as a serious invitation, but Sui seemed to have accepted it warmly. She urged him to finish his work quickly if he was going to come over. He agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After they wrapped up their tasks, Inchul and Sui left the company together and got into a taxi. From a distance, Sarah was watching them quietly before turning away. Inchul thought about how Sarah might have been worried about him being alone. But it seemed Sui genuinely cared for him, a quality that he found unexpectedly endearing. During the taxi ride, they stopped at a convenience store to buy some drinks. Inchul asked whether her house was far, and Sui replied that it was quite close, they were almost there. Soon, they arrived outside her building. Sui invited him inside, and he stepped into her apartment for the first time. Looking around, he complimented her place, remarking on how gorgeous, clean, and pleasantly scented it was. Sui replied with a laugh, saying she might have tidied up more had she known he was coming, but admitted it was still a bit messy. She gestured for him to sit down, trying to put him at ease. Inchul felt a little uncertain, wondering whether it was appropriate to be in a girl's room, especially someone he was just getting closer to. He wasn't sure what to do next. Meanwhile, Sui felt a wave of nervousness wash over her, questioning why she had brought him home after everything that had happened earlier. She sighed to herself, thinking the mood had vanished now that he was here, and wondered what she had been thinking when she invited him over. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Sui asked if Inchul wanted to watch a movie, mentioning that she had Netflix. Inchul eagerly agreed and pointed to a movie he wanted to watch. Sui noted it was a melodrama and asked if that was his kind of film. She admitted she had wanted to watch it too but never had the chance. Inchul felt excited, thinking that watching a movie with a girl at her house was one of his dreams coming true. As the movie played, Sui soon admitted that it was boring and not really her type. Inchul, however, was deeply moved by the story. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he grew emotional. Sui noticed and asked if he was really crying. Inchul explained that the story was sad, about loving someone deeply but never being able to be with them, and he wondered how people who experience such painful love must feel. Sui thought to herself that he was being overly emotional for such a familiar storyline. She wondered which version of him was real, the sensitive one watching the movie or the more casual person she had seen before. Thinking about their interactions the previous day made her feel self-conscious and uncertain. Suddenly, Inchul noticed her mood shift and asked if something was wrong. He wondered if she was feeling hot or perhaps running a fever. Concerned, he checked her temperature and confirmed she did not have a fever. Sui playfully scolded him, calling him an idiot for worrying about a fever when watching the movie. Inchul teased her back, asking if she would be alright doing yoga 2 days in a row. Sui smiled slyly and asked what he planned to do next, keeping the atmosphere light despite their earlier tension. The evening continued with a mix of laughter, light teasing, and quiet moments where they both grew more comfortable with each other's presence. Inchul felt a growing warmth towards Sui. After that, the two of them started playing the game together. As they played, Inchul found himself wondering why they never seemed to get tired of gaming every day. To him, it always felt like a new and different experience each time. He was also particularly excited about the idea of playing near the window, as he believed that doing so would make the experience even more enjoyable. She was saying that she hadn't been prepared for that kind of yoga session. In response, he pointed out that she seemed to be enjoying it a lot, even though she claimed she wasn't. She found it strange that she might actually get excited by something like that, especially since there was no way to know if people below could see them, or if someone in the building across the way might be watching. At one point, she mentioned that she thought someone nearby was actually observing them. He began to wonder whether she was hinting that she wanted him to take things a step further. When she asked if he had heard what she just said, he told her that she shouldn't worry about other people. If anyone wanted to watch, he added, they could go ahead. It would be a shame if he were the only one who got to see. Regardless of everything they had said, both of them continued playing their game without stopping. Meanwhile, Su Yeju was sitting in a bar, drinking and thinking to herself that she was feeling bored. Her name was Su Yeju, and she worked as an assistant manager at a travel agency founded in the year 2000. While Yeju was sitting at the bar, drinking her beer quietly, her colleague from the company suddenly approached her. He asked if she had come alone and suggested that they drink together. Yeju replied that she had actually wanted to be alone that day. He tried to lighten the mood and told her not to be like that. He mentioned that he had been watching her for a while and that she had looked bored the entire time. He added that he thought he might be able to change that for her. Yeju laughed at his comment and responded with a playful, "Is that so?" He confidently said yes and encouraged her to have a drink with him. They raised their glasses and cheered together. As they drank, he was silently thinking to himself that women like her were all the same. It just took a bit of boldness and they would be ready for anything. Yeju poured more beer into his glass and encouraged him to keep drinking. He hesitated internally, wondering whether he should have another round. He was also puzzled by how fast she was drinking, noting to himself that it wasn't whiskey but still, the shots felt incredibly strong. As soon as he finished his second glass, she poured him another without hesitation. He kept thinking to himself that no matter what she did, she was still a woman, and wherever he went, he wouldn't lose his upper hand. But suddenly, everything around him began to blur, and he started to feel as if he was losing consciousness. When he eventually came to, he found himself in a motel room. His eyes were blindfolded. He panicked and pleaded for someone to remove the blindfold, begging, "Please, open my eyes." Yeju was sitting nearby and spoke coldly, telling him how pathetic he was. She reminded him of all the arrogant things he had said earlier about how he was going to train her. Yet now he couldn't even handle this. He kept begging her to open his eyes, but she continued speaking with clear disappointment. She said that if he had been more entertaining, maybe she would have played along longer, but this just wasn't going to work. When he asked her what she meant, she brushed it off, saying that the whole experience had been boring and that she had to leave. As she prepared to go, he desperately pleaded for her not to walk out like that and to at least remove his blindfold. But Yeju didn't respond to his pleas. She simply walked away, leaving him there. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Inchul and Sui were out on a date after the events at the motel. Inchul was reflecting to himself with a sense of relief that, fortunately, he hadn't returned to the past again. Instead, he was here, enjoying the present moment with her. Sui suggested they head to a yakitori place for a second round. She mentioned that it had just opened and that she'd made a reservation through Instagram. Inchul kept thinking to himself, repeating with reassurance that he had not returned to the past. They arrived at the restaurant and started drinking again. As they ate, Inchul reflected that enjoying good food right after work and being in a relationship with Sui felt truly pleasant. However, he couldn't completely ignore the fact that he still had feelings for Sarah. He questioned internally whether what he was doing was okay, if it was fair. Still, since Sui hadn't brought it up and seemed happy with how things were, he figured it was all right. He tried to simplify the situation in his mind. He was currently getting to know this woman better, and if he kept things steady at this pace, perhaps eventually he could make things work with Sarah. A meeting was underway in the conference room when the section chief gave a formal directive. She instructed Inchul to accompany manager Yang Minu and assistant manager Su Yeju on a business trip to the East Coast. The decision seemed sudden but deliberate. About 30 minutes earlier, the meeting had commenced with Yang Minu taking the lead in presenting the agenda. With poise and confidence, he introduced the analysis of domestic travel trends for the current quarter, laying out a series of important points. Despite the significance of the presentation, Inchul's mind was somewhere else entirely. He sat at the table, nibbling absent-mindedly, but failed to focus on a single word being said. His thoughts were lost in the memories of the previous evening, which, for him, had been unforgettable. The night had been filled with laughter and excitement, especially during the gaming session he shared with Sui. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The moment was replaying vividly in his head, leaving him wondering whether she would invite him over again today. Sarah, seated nearby, noticed Inchul's wandering attention. She leaned in slightly and reminded him to stay alert, warning that the section chief might assign him a briefing at any moment. Snapping back to the present, he nodded and assured her with a quick, "Okay," while silently appreciating her concern. He thought to himself how considerate Sarah was being, looking out for him even in such a formal setting, and the moment felt almost surreal. Everything seemed perfect to him, like he was floating in his own little paradise. After Yang Minu concluded his briefing, the section chief commented that his plan would be used as the foundation for future developments. She had been observing the room and couldn't help but notice Inchul's lack of engagement. Turning her attention toward him, she directly questioned why he seemed so distracted. Her tone was calm but firm, asking whether he believed the subject matter didn't require his attention. Caught off guard, Inchul hesitated for a second before replying. He denied any disinterest and claimed that he had simply been taking time to organize his thoughts. The section chief raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied with the vague answer, and challenged him further. She asked him to share exactly what he had been thinking about if he had, in fact, been reflecting on the discussion. Under pressure, Inchul managed to gather his composure and began to speak with newfound seriousness. He explained that based on Manager Yang's plan, the East Coast had emerged as a rising hotspot due to its ease of accessibility. He stated that the core objective moving forward should be to design attractive travel courses and identify a target demographic accordingly. His response was surprisingly articulate. Su Yiju contributed to the discussion, suggesting that the MZ generation would be the most suitable target group. Inchul picked up the thread and elaborated further, pointing out that the location had gained traction after featuring in a recent trending drama, making it even more appealing to modern travelers. He added that if the strategy was implemented effectively, it would create a compelling opportunity to draw in the right audience and simultaneously boost the company's popularity and visibility. His response left an impact. Everyone in the room, including those who had doubted him, appeared impressed by his insight and delivery. Su Yiju, still slightly surprised, remarked that it was not a bad suggestion coming from someone new to the team. Blushing slightly, Inchul expressed his gratitude and thanked her humbly. Satisfied with how things had unfolded, the section chief finalized her decision, instructing that Inchul would join manager Yang Minu and assistant manager Su Yiju on the business trip to the East Coast. Her tone made it clear that this was not up for debate. However, Yang Minu raised a polite objection. He pointed out that Inchul was still relatively new to the company and suggested that it might be too early for him to take on a field assignment of that nature. The section chief responded by acknowledging his concern but maintained her stance. She stated that Inchul wouldn't be taking the lead on any major tasks, but he could still be helpful in scouting the area and supporting their efforts. She reminded them that, with only 2 people, having an extra hand could prove to be quite valuable. Though there was an air of resistance from some of the other team members, the section chief quickly clarified that Inchul would primarily handle minor tasks. Her real intention was to give him some first-hand field experience. Yang Minu accepted the directive respectfully. After the meeting concluded, Inchul found himself in the restroom corridor where he ran into Sui. She looked worried and confronted him immediately. She questioned what exactly had happened earlier, referencing the yoga session they had done together to relieve stress. She pointed out that if others had seen them, the situation might have been easily misunderstood. Her words struck a nerve. Inchul responded by asking what he had even done wrong and confessed he genuinely didn't understand the issue. Sui, clearly upset, told him that he had been smiling from ear to ear while looking at Chief Sarah during the meeting. That, she explained, had annoyed her. Visibly shocked, Inchul denied it vehemently. He insisted that it wasn't what she thought and clarified that there was absolutely nothing going on between him and Sarah. Despite his denial, he cautiously asked if Sui was, perhaps, feeling a little jealous. Internally, he couldn't help but notice how cute she looked when she was upset. Still fuming, Sui asked him if he was seriously thinking about the chief in that kind of situation. The comment hit him hard, and in that moment, a flashback triggered in his mind. He recalled the previous evening when Sarah had told both him and Sui to head home. Returning to the present, he recognized how tense things had become. Realizing he needed to shift the tone quickly before things got out of hand, he gently took her hand and tried to change the topic. With a slightly teasing voice, he called her an idiot and told her she was misunderstanding everything. Trying to lighten the mood, he explained that the only reason he had noticed the chief was because of her perfume. It had smelled nice, and he was thinking about buying the same one for Sui. She looked at him skeptically and asked whether he was genuinely thinking about perfume at that moment. He confirmed that it was exactly that. Internally, he sighed in relief, feeling that he had successfully turned the situation around. With confidence, he told himself that he had reversed the tension and steered the moment in his favor. He then casually mentioned that they needed to continue playing their game. Sui looked at him like he had lost his mind and reminded him that they were still at the office. She scoffed at his timing and went to touch up her makeup, muttering that she looked like a complete mess. Inchul couldn't help but laugh, saying that it was all because he liked her so much. She told him to stop speaking nonsense and ordered him to follow her. With a playful smile, he replied with a cheerful "okay," and followed along. Unbeknownst to both of them, Su Yiju had been standing behind the nearby staircase, watching the entire scene unfold. She had overheard their conversation from the very beginning and found herself quietly laughing at the drama. As she stood there alone, she thought to herself how amusing and adorable the two of them looked together, their chemistry undeniable even when they bickered. It was finally the exploration day. Just as team leader and Hyerin had mentioned earlier, Inchul was assigned to go on the business trip alongside manager Yang Minu and assistant manager Su Yiju. The three of them were now seated inside a car, heading toward their designated destination. It was the first time Inchul was going on a trip with them, and though he appeared calm on the outside, his mind was active with thoughts. As they drove, Inchul began reflecting on the people accompanying him. He thought of manager Yang Minu, who had always been a dependable and easygoing sunbae at work. Even in the past, Minu had a reputation for making the work environment more relaxed and tolerable, second only to Sarah in that regard. Then there was assistant manager Su Yiju. Although she mostly worked in the design department, Inchul realized that he had no clear impression of her personality. Not before the trip and not even now, despite being seated so close to her. Midway through the drive, the car pulled into a station to refuel. Yiju stepped out and informed the others that she was going to use the restroom. Minu smiled and casually told her to go ahead. The moment she disappeared from view, Minu turned toward Inchul and spoke in a more serious tone, advising him to be cautious and keep his distance. He asked if Inchul understood, to which Inchul responded with a light laugh and a nod, indicating that he got the message. As they waited, Inchul's thoughts drifted back to the recent past. He recalled what had taken place the previous weekend. Since Sui already had plans that day, he had decided to spend the evening at home, playing video games. As he left the company and made his way home, something unexpected caught his attention. From a distance, he noticed manager Yang Minu and assistant manager Su Yiju sitting together in a restaurant. It had struck him as odd. Why were two senior employees meeting separately at that hour? Curiosity got the better of him, and as he looked closer through the window pane, he accidentally locked eyes with Minu, who had seen him through the restaurant mirror. From inside, Minu subtly gestured using improvised sign language, clearly telling Inchul, "You saw us, but don't say a word, or else." Inchul had been stunned by the moment. Shocked, but without much of a choice, he simply nodded in acknowledgement. Reflecting on it now, he still found it hard to believe. He had never imagined that Minu and Yiju might be involved. Though he admitted he wasn't in a position to judge anyone, the possibility had genuinely never crossed his mind. He hadn't even considered that there could be something going on between them. Returning to the present, the three of them were back on the road. As they drove along the scenic coastline, Inchul glanced out of the window and commented on how beautiful the sea looked. Minu responded with a casual acknowledgement, asking if that was so. A moment later, Inchul turned around to speak to the assistant manager, encouraging her to take a look at the view as well, only to find her sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Minu took the opportunity to redirect Inchul's attention. He advised him, almost like an older brother would, that it would be wiser to keep his eyes forward. Slightly embarrassed, Inchul apologized and then, hesitating a bit, brought up a question he had been holding in. He asked the manager how he and Yiju had ended up together. With a chuckle, Minu admitted that he had made the first move. Inchul expressed mild surprise, prompting Minu to explain further. He said that given Yiju's personality, he hadn't expected things to work out, but she had told him to behave comfortably around her. And from there, their relationship naturally progressed. Inchul, still processing it all, silently reflected on how unexpected the whole thing was. To think that the laid-back manager had this side to him, and that the seemingly high-standard assistant manager was this approachable, it all felt unusual. He had always assumed her standards would be sky-high, but apparently, she was much more down-to-earth than he'd believed. Shifting the focus, Minu informed him that they would first hold a meeting with the interested parties and then head to the lodge. Inchul nodded in understanding, but just as he was about to ask another question, his phone began to ring. Curious, he looked at the screen and noticed a message from Sui. It simply read, "Call me when you arrive." 2 hours later, the scheduled meeting had ended. Minu, stretching his back and loosening his collar, joked that in-person meetings only took about 30 minutes, whereas phone calls dragged on for hours. He let out a hearty laugh, clearly relieved that the face-to-face part was done. Inchul then asked where they would be staying. He assumed it would be a standard B&B. Minu responded by teasingly questioning whether coming all the way to Gangneung just to stay at a B&B wouldn't be a bit of a waste. He added that he had made other arrangements and had reserved a different kind of place for them. Soon, they arrived at a picturesque accommodation. As they stepped out, Inchul's face lit up with excitement and admiration. The place was stunning. He expressed his amazement, complimenting the choice and calling it incredible. Minu turned to Yeju and asked whether the place was to her liking. She replied that it was truly pretty. Inchul, still impressed, commented on how big their company's budget must be if they were able to reserve such a beautiful lodge. Laughing at the misunderstanding, Minu corrected him, revealing that it wasn't a company expense. It was paid from his own pocket. Inchul's eyes widened in surprise at the revelation. Minu then instructed him to leave their luggage there for the time being. At that moment, Yeju asked if she could freshen up and take a shower. She mentioned that since they had been out since morning, her body felt sticky. Minu told her to go ahead. Once she disappeared into the shower, Minu turned to Inchul again and said it was time for them to get ready. Inchul, confused, asked what they needed to prepare for. Minu replied that since they had come all the way here with Yeju, they should make the most of it by eating something delicious. He said he would begin setting things up at the lodge and instructed Inchul to go out and buy some meat and alcohol. He emphasized that Inchul already knew the drill, especially about picking up pork neck. Inchul groaned and asked why they had to drink, thinking to himself that Minu could never handle his alcohol properly. Every time they drank, it was always Inchul who ended up looking after him. Nevertheless, he set out to gather all the groceries. As he walked away from the lodge and toward the local market, a thought crept into his mind. If Minu got drunk again this time, it would likely be him and assistant manager Yeju left alone. The idea lingered for a while as he made his way through the quiet streets, unsure whether he was more nervous or curious about how the rest of the evening might unfold. Inchul was busy preparing dinner at the lodge. After setting up the table with all the delicious food he had cooked, he called out to the others, announcing that everything was ready. He asked manager Minu and assistant manager Yeju to come down and eat. The two of them soon made their way to the dining area. Minu, impressed, complimented Inchul for doing an excellent job. Yeju echoed the sentiment, expressing her appreciation with a warm smile. As Minu walked past Inchul, he leaned in and whispered something under his breath, telling him, "You know what to do later." Inchul nodded with a knowing smile and replied affirmatively. About 30 minutes earlier, Minu had pulled Inchul aside and quietly told him to just drink a little, read the atmosphere, and leave early. Inchul laughed in response, wishing the manager good luck before heading off. Returning to the present, Yeju and Minu settled at the table and began to eat, casually sipping their drinks. Inchul remained standing nearby, thinking to himself that he should probably leave after a short while, especially considering how obvious it was that Minu liked Yeju that much. He didn't want to get in the way. As the drinks kept coming, Yeju remarked with a disappointed tone that she couldn't handle alcohol with low alcohol content, calling it unfortunate. Inchul took mental note of her reaction, thinking that he had anticipated something like this. That's why he had prepared for it in advance. He found it unusual. Most people complained about strong alcohol, but she was the opposite. Minu reached into a cooler and pulled out a bottle of 30-year-old Ballantine's whiskey. Proudly, he announced what he had brought and mentioned that he had also prepared plenty of ice to go along with it. He poured drinks for everyone and even handed a glass to Inchul, inviting him to join them. Inchul accepted the drink eagerly, his expression lighting up with enthusiasm. But inwardly, he wondered if Minu would be all right. The manager, whom he knew well, had a habit of getting drunk too quickly. Nevertheless, Inchul raised his glass and toasted to the success of their exploration. An hour passed. Minu was now completely drunk. He had blacked out and slumped over, unresponsive. Inchul glanced at him, slightly dumbfounded. The alcohol wasn't even that strong, he thought, so how had he already passed out? Yeju, unfazed, commented that she had expected this to happen. She noted that Minu had gone through the trouble of preparing so much. She, on the other hand, continued to drink without hesitation. Inchul stared at her in disbelief. She had just downed a strong shot of whiskey in one go. He questioned silently whether she was even human. She then turned to him and confirmed, "You're Inchul, right?" With a smile, she added that he actually drank better than he looked. He laughed awkwardly and replied that he often heard that. But in his mind, he was starting to feel lightheaded. If he drank any more, he was sure he would pass out too. Just then, his phone began buzzing. Calls from Sui were coming through repeatedly. Noticing the incoming call, Yeju assured him that it was okay to take it there. But Inchul politely declined and said he'd step outside to answer. Once out of earshot, he answered the call, only to hear Sui shouting furiously. She immediately demanded if he had a death wish. He was stunned by her tone and asked what she was talking about. Sui snapped that he had ignored her messages despite promising to call once he arrived. It had been hours, and she hadn't heard from him. He tried to explain that he had been planning to call her, but had been genuinely busy all day. She wasn't convinced. She accused him of not being too busy to sit and drink with someone else. Before Inchul could reply, a voice spoke from behind him. Yeju had followed him out and casually remarked that the person on the line sounded like it must be Sui. Startled, Inchul quickly ended the call. Back on the other end, Sui was fuming. She muttered to herself that she was going to kill him when he got back. Shocked to find Yeju behind him, Inchul stammered and asked what she was doing there. She explained that she had simply come out to get some fresh air. Judging from his reaction, though, she teased that she must have been right. There had definitely been something going on between him and Sui at the company a few days ago. Panic washed over Inchul. He began to worry that others in the office might already know. He was horrified at the thought of this getting back to the department chief. If that happened, he was certain he'd be fired. Sensing his fear, Yeju told him not to panic and reassured him that she didn't care about what the two of them did at the company. But Inchul wasn't about to let the matter slide. In a hushed voice, he reminded her that he had seen her meeting manager Minu secretly at a restaurant. He warned her that if she told anyone about his relationship with Sui, he'd have no choice but to reveal what he had seen as well. He looked at her seriously and asked if she understood. She raised an eyebrow, amused by his attempt to threaten her. With a smirk, she told him that she had only brought it up to tease him, but he was clearly taking it too far. She accused him of speaking recklessly. Then, to his shock, she revealed that all she had done was have a cup of coffee with manager Lee at a nearby cafe, not Minu. She reminded him that what he had seen wasn't what he assumed. Inchul stood frozen, panic rising again as he realized he had misunderstood the situation entirely. He thought to himself that if word of this reached the department chief, not only his career, but also his relationships with both Sui and Sarah would be over. Desperate, he bowed before Yeju and begged her to forgive him just this once. He promised to do anything to keep the situation under wraps. He repeated that he hadn't meant to be sneaky. He had just been trying to protect himself. Yeju paused, intrigued by his desperate plea. Her expression changed slightly. She asked him to repeat himself that you just say you'd do anything for her? Cautiously, he confirmed that yes, he would. She nodded thoughtfully, then tilted her head. With a mischievous glint in her eyes, she asked him to bark. He blinked in confusion. What? She repeated herself. She wanted him to bark like a dog. Inchul stood frozen, his mind spiraling. He thought to himself, is she serious? Is this woman insane? But then, weighing the consequences, he realized that if he could get through this moment without any fallout, it might just be worth the embarrassment. He told himself he had already messed up. He had to own it. And so, without another word, he began to bark. Yeju looked at him, equal parts amused and bewildered. She muttered to herself, wondering what was wrong with him. He was actually doing what she said. She had never expected him to go that far. But it was so unexpectedly entertaining that she couldn't help but laugh. The situation had turned into something far more amusing than she had anticipated. Inchul remarked that it should be enough for her and began to reflect on how disturbingly wicked her behavior became after she had been drinking. Just then, Yeju called out to him, asking him to come over. He responded with slight irritation, questioning what it was now, addressing her as the assistant manager. To his surprise, she invited him to play a game with her. She questioned why he was just standing there staring, and without hesitation, instructed him to lick her foot. Inchul was appalled at the request, visibly disgusted, and quickly apologized. However, she insisted he do as she said, mocking him by asking if he was some kind of retard who couldn't understand Korean. Though hesitant, he still muttered his resistance, and internally he began questioning her sanity. At the same time, a strange thought crossed his mind, wondering if, in fact, many guys would be willing to do something like this for a woman like Yeju. He concluded with frustration that he wasn't sure what to think anymore. Yeju continued asserting her control, telling him he was doing well and to keep it up. Inchul, on the other hand, was growing increasingly uneasy, thinking that she had completely lost her mind. He regretted ever getting involved with her, believing that had he stayed away, none of this would have happened. Despite his discomfort, he knew he had to carry on properly, fearing that she might expose his secret if he defied her. Though she was clearly bullying him, he reluctantly followed every command she gave. Meanwhile, Yeju began observing him with curiosity, thinking to herself that she had expected him to make excuses and back out. It surprised her to see that he wasn't exactly right in the head either. Amused and intrigued, she decided to provoke him further. On the other hand, Inchul realized the situation was spiraling out of control. He thought that if he didn't push back now, she might feel entitled to order him around like this again. Gathering his thoughts, he addressed her firmly, calling out to the assistant manager. But before he could say more, she abruptly told him to shut up. Despite his attempt to take control, she continued tormenting him. When she questioned what he thought he was doing, Inchul calmly replied that he was only doing what she had asked, subtly implying that he hoped she wasn't entertaining any strange thoughts herself. In response, she finally told him he could stop now. Just as the tension was beginning to shift, they were both startled by Minu's voice echoing from somewhere nearby. He was shouting out, calling for Yeju, asking where she was and wondering where everyone had gone. It became clear that Minu was searching for her throughout the entire lodge, unaware of what had just transpired. Minu finally found Yeju and remarked, with a hint of relief, that was where she had disappeared to.